For the better part of 10 years, we've had the Great Western Railway Saint class 460 in TS Classic. The old Victory Works model of September 2016 has had a good run, but now it's time to usher in the new Saint from Caledonia Works. As always, this video is not sponsored by the developer, and I bought the add-on with my own money. But first, a brief history on the Saint. This was a class of 77 locomotives built between 1902 and 1913 to the design of George Jackson Churchward, and they're notable for being the first in a long line of standard 460 designs on the GWR. There were 3 prototype locomotives, followed by 74 production locomotives built across 4 batches. The batches were referred to as Scots, Ladies, Saints and Courts based on their names. For the longest time, I thought Scots in this context was spelt with only one T, in reference to Scotland, but only recently have I realised that it's actually spelt with 2 T's, because most of the locomotives in this batch have names relating to novels written by Sir Walter Scott. As for why I thought that batch was built in Scotland, it's because 2987 Bride of Lammermoor has a Scottish accent in Tales of New Wessex. I've been reliably informed that the Scots and Ladies differed from the later Saints and Courts by way of lever reverses and straight frames, but were later modified with curved frames, while the Saints and Courts had screw reverses and curved frames from new. The reverser rod was also moved to be behind the wheel splashes. The Ladies, Saints and Courts never ran as Atlantics. Curiously, 13 members of the class were initially built with the 442 wheel arrangement, also known as Atlantic. As for why any Saints were built in this configuration, it was for comparison with a De Glen compound imported from France. Crews thought that the Saint Atlantics had a more comfortable ride than their 460 sisters, but due to its better adhesive weight, the 460 wheel arrangement became the standard for this class. All the Saint Atlantics were rebuilt as 460s by 1913, and now that I think about it, I wonder why the whole class is referred to as the Saint class when only 20 of them actually had the word Saint in their names. Personally, I prefer how the Saints look as 460s, and have never really known what to make of their Atlantic configuration. Unfortunately, this pack doesn't include locomotive number 100 William Dean. That was the first prototype built in 1902. One member of the class, number 2935 Canham Court, was experimentally built with Lentz rotary cam poppet valve gear, but this variant is not included in TS. You can, at the very least, change the number of an existing engine to 2935 and the right nameplates will show up, but it'll just be a normal Saint. As an aside, I noticed that one of 2935's classmates, number 2903, was named Lady of Lions, and I bring this one up because she reminds me of a semi-recent company by the name of Lions Tea Exchange. If you know, you know. In 1924, number 2925 St. Martin was rebuilt as the prototype for Collett's 4900 Hull class, and curiously, retained her name. Withdrawals of the Saint class began in 1931, when 2985 Peveril of the Peak, 2910 Lady of Shalott, and 2909 Lady of Provence were taken out of service. As time went on, the Saints were superseded by newer and more powerful 460s from the Castle and King classes, but 47 Saints were still in service upon the creation of British Railways in 1948. The last of these engines in service was 2920 St. David, and he was withdrawn in 1953. None of the original Saints were preserved, but in 2019, a new member of the class, in the form of number 2999 Lady of Legend, was completed after many years under construction. Technically, this isn't a new locomotive, as she's really just a backdated version of 4942 Maindee Hall, but still an interesting machine in any case. I was lucky to see the real Lady of Legend during my UK trip, but she was in disguise as 2986 Robin Hood when I saw her at Minehead. The next day, she was in a double header with 7812 Ilstoke Manor. CW released their GWR Saint pack on the 12th of February 2026, and it's available on their website for £25, or $59.36 in my local currency. I didn't acquire the pack on launch day as I was busy watching trains at Hamilton's Frankton station, so I was a bit late to the party, as it were. But regardless, this is the second time Mr. Wilson has modelled a Great Western 460 for TS. The first was in May 2023, when he did the King class of 1927. As far as I know, the only GWR 460s that we still haven't got in TS are number 36, the Crocodile, and number 2601, the Kruger. Something I've forgotten to mention so far is the fact that the CW Saints were done as a special commission, same as the 1400 class 042 tank and 2251 class 060 tender engine. The Saint is a similarly comprehensive pack to the London and South Western Railway N15 and London and North Eastern Railway A4 classes, in the sense that you get a large amount of liveries and variants for your money. The add-on also includes updated versions of some Matrix Trains coaches. More specifically, you get the normal top lights as well as the panelled top lights in 57-foot and 70-foot variants. As for the livery selection on the locomotives, this is as follows. GWR 1902 to 1905 for the Scots in either Atlantic or 460 conditions. GWR 1906 to 1909 for the Scots and Ladies, and it applies to the Atlantic condition as well. GWR 1907 to 1909 for the Saints and Courts. GWR 1909 to 1912, now modified with superheaters and extended smoke boxes, for all 5 batches including the Atlantics. GWR 1912 to 1922. GWR 1923 to 1931. GWR 1931 to 1939 for the Scots and Ladies with straight frames. GWR 1931 to 1942 for the Scots and Ladies with curved frames, as well as the Saints and Courts. GWR 1942 to 1948. GWR with a BR number plate, 1948. BR lined black, 1948 to 1953. and the new build number 2999 Lady of Legend. I was initially surprised by the lack of a BR-lined green livery in the base pack, but to be fair, the Saints never wore that livery in real life. If you're wondering who made this BR green reskin for the GWR Saint, it was Epic Bastard, and I checked with them beforehand to make sure that it was okay to mention this reskin in the video. And before I forget, I'll do a side-by-side comparison between the old Victory Works model and her newer CW counterpart. The post-1912 variants of the Saints had more consistent numbers and variations, so they're grouped together in the scenario editor. The variants are labelled as S and L for Scots and Ladies, or S and C for Saints and Courts, with an extra CF or SF marking to denote the presence of curved or straight frames. You don't get straight frames on the Saints and Courts as these engines never had them in real life. Straight frames don't appear on the post-1939 Scots and Ladies variants as all the engines that still had those frames had all been withdrawn by 1939. Thinking back to 2999 Lady of Legend, CW's depiction in TS includes ATC equipment and a water scoop, two features that are not present on the real locomotive. Meanwhile, the sounds were recorded from the real 2999 by Steam Sound Supreme, a developer who has worked with CW many times over the years. Of course, the Saint makes use of SimNation's Locomotion 2.0 scripting, and she has fillable sandboxes as well as the scripted tender tank and water level, two new features introduced in late 2025. Other features on this locomotive include, but are certainly not limited to, a realistic fully functional cab, customizable headlamp arrangement on both the locomotive and tender, period-accurate GWR lamps, a fluctuating water level depending on the route gradient, fire intensity synchronized with the exhaust beat, performance mode Pro, which is toggled with Shift P, realistic performance physics, realistic regulator and steam chest simulation, lump firing simulation, and a simple mode, which is toggled with Control A and removes the reverser lock and steam chest simulation. CW and SimNation have certainly come a long way since the original Caledonian Railway 123 of late 2017. When you go to place a Saint down in the scenario editor, you'll notice that the pack's contents are distributed across 3 folders instead of them all being packed into one. Pack 1 has the locomotive variants, while packs 2 and 3 have the coaches. My first run with the GWR Saint was on the Stainmore, Shap and Eden Valley route, going from Kirkby Stephen East to Bowes, and effectively doing the return working of the test run I did with LMS Jubilee number 5570 New Zealand. This time, I was using 2928 St Sebastian with 8 57-foot panelled top lights in tow, and as for why I chose to run on the Stainmore route again, it's because I heard tell about an engine and some tar wagons. Let's try that again. I heard tell about the GWR Saint being a good hill climber. Around a quarter of a mile east of Kirkby Stephen East, the line starts climbing at 1 in 72, and the grade doesn't really level out until Stainmore Summit. As for how 2928 Saint Sebastian performed on this run, he was up to 22 miles per hour upon reaching the start of the climb, and could still accelerate, albeit slowly, on the grade at close to full boiler pressure. I did my best to maintain the water level and fire mass at the ideal levels, and noticed that the engine didn't lose as much speed as I thought he would when the gradient briefly increased to 1 in 57. It went back down to 1 in 60 soon after. 2928 seemed content with plodding along at 29 miles per hour for most of the climb, and I noticed that the exhaust has a really good bark at 29. I was impressed with how well Saint Sebastian performed on the climb to Stainmore Summit. He actually gained a little bit more speed on the 1 in 60, and at no point did the boiler pressure drop below 200 psi. As an aside, I'm considering reviewing the Stainmore route at some point, but I don't know when. Out of curiosity, I did another test with the Atlantic variant to see how she performs. This was a run from Newton Stewart to Stranraer Town, with 2983 Red Gauntlet in her original Atlantic condition as number 183 and hauling 8 Maunsell coaches from the Southern Railway. A Great Western engine hauling Southern coaches in Scotland. Seems legit. Anyway, before I forget, here's a run through of most of the cab camera views. As for the locomotive's performance on this run to Stranraer Town, she managed to accelerate her train up to 38 miles per hour before reaching the incline west of Newton Stewart. I soon realised that the Atlantic wasn't as good at climbing hills as her 460 counterpart. Red Gauntlet was down to around 24 miles per hour, but got back to 26 just before the top of the hill. At that point, I shut the regulator, let the engine coast for a while, and took the opportunity to put more coal in the firebox and water in the boiler. I remembered that this variant of the Saint hasn't got a superheater, which probably explains why she took longer to build up steam than I was expecting. Once the boiler pressure got back up to beyond 200 psi, I tried to gain more speed before the next hill. At this point, Kirkowen Station was just over a mile away, and I went through the aforementioned station at 38 miles per hour. There's yet another incline soon after passing Kirkowen, and 183 Red Gauntlet was up to 48 miles per hour upon reaching the 1 in 100, and actually maintained that speed over the crest of the hill. Not long after, she got up to 58 miles per hour on a 1 in 200 uphill grade. At this point, I thought I'd just go for the burn, without referencing Tony Basil, and tried to keep the speed up as much as I could for the rest of the journey. I tried shoveling coal past the ideal fire mass to see if that would improve steaming, and it sort of did. Going down the 1 in 63, later 1 in 150 incline between Kirkcowan and Glen Luce gave me another opportunity to inject more water, as that used a lot of steam if I tried it with the regulator open. I initially wanted it to be a yobbo and go screaming through Glen Luce at 78 miles per hour, or faster, but the signalman conveniently decided to be a knob and set the points for the occupied crossing loop when I was only around half a mile out. Just my luck, and the blasted points refused to change back.
You can probably guess the rest.
After that borderline infuriating setback, I had to go back into the scenario editor and move the train to Glen Luce before resuming the journey. To be clear, I'm not blaming CW for the dodgy points. If anything, it's partially my fault, as I would have had a better chance of stopping in time had I not been speeding like a maniac, without referencing Michael Cimbello. Once back on the move, it was an easier run due to the generally flatter terrain west of Glen Luce. The last uphill section was the climb from Castle Kennedy to a spot around half a mile from the abandoned signal box at Cairnryan Junction. In closing, I consider the GWR Saint from Caledonia Works worthy of a 9 out of 10 rating. With a large, but easier to understand, amount of variation, Mr. Wilson's usual high standard of modelling and texturing, not to mention the good sound set, features, hill climbing abilities, and the inclusion of the Atlantic variant, I would go so far as to say that the Saint is a contender for being one of my favourite CW add-ons, on par with the LNER A3 and A4 Pacifics, GWR Pacific number 111 The Great Bear, and Caledonian Railway 903 class. If you've stuck around to the end of the video, you win a strange individual who tastes herbs outside a public building in ancient Rome. It's the Basilica Basilica.